Thank you so much for making it on today. My name is Lucas Eastham, senior scientist focused on fermentation at the Good Food Institute, really looking at what are the technical opportunities and hurdles in the industry. And so I really wanted to just say thank you for coming today. You know, we had a lot of great discussions, a lot of collaborations, and of course, the food, which everyone I'm sure enjoyed. Keep drinking water and coffee and enjoy yourselves. So it's really my pleasure to welcome our wonderful group of speakers here today, where we're going to focus more on the road to commercialization. So really, after talking with everyone, there's definitely so much great innovation happening in R&D and the industry. That is really important for us. We wanted to talk about what does it take to take innovation to a commercial scale. Thinking of, as everyone likes to say, the end in mind, and how do you actually scale up a bioprocess or scale up a food ingredient and create these cohesive systems. So at GFI, you know, we've often talked about the lack of manufacturing capacity, but we also need to keep in mind that you need to have technologically mature processes that are able to scale before you can even come to commercial scale capacity. So in this session, our speakers, they'll address the latest assessment of the current manufacturing capacity and the tools, experience, and frameworks to help companies overcome the commercialization valley of death. Later this afternoon, we're going to have a second scale-up session focusing on financing and de-risking frameworks to help in the scale-up process. So if time permits, we'll hold a Q&A session at the end, so please put those in the SwapCard app, and our online moderators and virtual folks can also partake in the Q&A, so all questions in the SwapCard app, please, and make sure that you're also still connecting with each other in SwapCard. So with that in mind, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Flora Buttilar. She is the managing partner and co-founder at Bright Green Partners, a global alternative protein consulting firm powered by 2,000 global expert network. She is an accomplished leader in the alternative protein space and has directed over 25 projects for the global clients like Ajinomoto and Kraft Heinz within the alternative protein industry. She is also a sought-after conference speaker, sharing her insights on industry trends, challenges, and opportunities, and the honoring of the Forbes 30 Under 30 2023 European Manufacturing and Industry List. So at the end of her presentation, Flora is also going to announce a major Bright Green Partner resource for the alternative protein industry. So thank you for leading off our session today, Flora, and let's give her a round of applause, please.
Thanks, Lucas, for the nice words. Hi, everyone. Indeed, I'm Flora Buttilar, came from the Netherlands here to speak today about commercialization. And basically, I want to show three things today in the presentation as an overview before all the other great speakers are diving more into the details of that. Because we could be talking here the whole day or the whole conference about what it takes to commercialize basically this industry. I've only got roughly 12 minutes, so let's focus on some of the key factors. And I cannot go into all of the challenges. I will be talking about two of them. And the objective is from those two major challenges to also show the differences within plant-based fermentation and cultivated meat, because there are differences, as well as potential opportunities to overcome these challenges that we are facing. And do stay with me till the end, because then I'm going to announce something cool. Let's hope this works, because it doesn't yet. Yeah. So on the first slide, I would like to show basically as an understanding for everyone where we're currently at with some of the challenges, because everyone is indeed talking capacity issues and achieving commercialization of this industry. And in order to get there, we need to have capacity to be able to produce actually. Well, one side note is on the slide we show plant-based fermentation cultivated, the differences between those. Of course, it depends whether you're in lab or commercial scale, which type of technology you're using. But generally speaking, right now for fermentation and plant-based, as we have analyzed together with the Good Food Institute and integration together with the Good Food Institute too, is that there is quite some capacity available globally to produce these type of products today. If we look at the future, that's a whole different story. We will definitely have an issue once consumers are adapting more and we want to bring more products to market. With cultivated right now, we already have an issue today because we only have 3 CMOs, so very limited access to capacity, and that will only increase the capacity bottleneck in the future. So this is just for everyone to have an understanding of where we are today. And right now we see two major challenges of commercialization. So one is, how do we get from an innovation from initial lab to all the way commercial scale with pilot and demo in between? How do we get a technology ready to move along that path of commercialization? Where, of course, it is very important that there is efficiency and that there is stability in the process and the type of outputs that you are creating, and that you can bring that to mass market consumers. And that can be in a product, but it can as well be in an ingredient, because I know many of you are in the B2B space and not necessarily only in the B2C space. And then the other part is, again, the capacity, where we see that there is quite some difficulty right now in demo and commercial scale, because often the technologies that we are working on, especially in fermentation, precision fermentation, cultivated meat, are relatively new technologies that have not been produced oftentimes yet in those demo and commercial scale stages, and therefore capacity needs to be designed still and upscaled in order to produce that. So the facilities and the capacity is not there yet, which results also in high capex and lead times. I will get to that in a bit, because right now we see that innovations of our proteins are still in various stages. So as I mentioned, not only the capacity itself, but generally also among plant-based, fermentation, cultivated, we see differences. This is not a whole industry overview. We took the most advanced company working on a certain technology. So there are definitely companies that are behind of some of these technologies that you see here on the screen. So it's not that cultivated meat, everyone is in pilot stage, unfortunately, yet, but there is at least proof of some of these companies. So you will see that cultivated is mostly still lab and pilot, or indicated by yellow. That plant-based, some of the technologies are still in pilot stage, but we, of course, everyone has tried also today here plant-based innovations. They are in a commercial scale already for decades right now. And on fermentation, it differs a bit depending on precision or biomass fermentation, because those are different types of production technologies and ingredients being used. But biomass fermentation, we have already commercial availability also on the market. So this is to indicate not only that there are differences, different approaches required in terms of production and commercialization for technology that we're talking about, or platforms, so whether that's plant-based, fermentation, cultivated, but also, again, to keep in mind that for some of the technologies, they have not been brought to market further than you see on the screen today, such as on pilot, and there's still quite some work to be done in order to get to that commercialization point. Now, in order to actually get there in higher stages of commercialization, you have basically three major routes of getting facilities out there in order to be able to produce these products. And that can be done via partnering with a CMO, CDMO. That can be done via setting up your own facility, and you can do that via retrofitting or setting up a greenfield facility, so a whole new facility. Obviously, there are also partnerships such as a joint venture or strategic investment, etc. And I believe Jolene is going to talk a little bit more about that today, so I will not dive into that. But generally speaking, there are 5 major drivers in order to define what kind of route to market you want to take when you need a facility in place in order to produce your products. And that differs. The drivers basically depend on how you view your risks and the capex that you have available and the efficiency and the ownership that you would like to have. With partnerships of CMO, CDMO, of course, that enables you to go way quicker to market and to invest less, although the OPEX is generally more expensive because you have to pay a fee for someone to take care of your production. But it also comes with way more efficiency because a CMO, CDMO is experienced in the type of process that you're requesting them to do and has developed this with other customers before as well. With retrofitting, this is great if there are already similar facilities available. I will get to those examples in a bit of what could be potential facilities to leverage. And obviously also less capex involved because there's already building and sometimes equipment you can use. There is less lead time because you don't have to construct a building from scratch. But the efficiency oftentimes is less because this building is not designed with the purpose of producing your type of product or ingredient in that process. Comes with a risk because you also might not know what you come across during the construction or the retrofitting, but you will have more ownership comparison with a CMO, CDMO. Then greenfield is definitely CapEx heavy, and it takes a lot of time to set that up, but you do have way more efficiency because it's a new building, and you will have way more ownership as well on the facility. But it comes with a risk because, especially if we're talking very new technologies and you have never set it up at a commercial stage before, you might develop something that you turn out is not working on a commercial scale or is already outdated by the time that the facility is operational in 3 or 4 years from now. I'm not saying that there's one single best strategy to follow. It fully depends on your own situation. So that's why we've put this into an overview for you to consider in your own scenario. Now, on the next slides, I will dive into each of the platforms of fermentation, plant-based and cultivated, to show how you could potentially go to market with mostly partnerships. Because we see that's very high in interest in general in the market, and that could give you a lot of time to win, basically, and test earlier on. So Integration and GFI have worked on a nice study. In July, they've launched this, where you can find more details. Also at BGP, we've looked in detail into how to leverage CMOs, CDMOs. And we see that generally, especially when you're in lab and potentially still on demo scale, oftentimes companies prefer this because it gives, well, less time, as I mentioned, less CapEx, but also their skill set of a CMO to overcome, to basically quicker get to market and to scale up your process. By the time that companies get into commercial scale is actually when they prefer to set up their own facility in order to have greater control and also operational efficiency on the process. And hopefully by then, you know what you would really like to produce and how you would like to produce it. So it also makes more sense to get your own facility off. This definitely works for biomass fermentation. No. Okay, works. So I will briefly touch upon this given time, but generally for a capacity challenge, you could win a lot of CapEx investment from working with a CMO versus when you would actually set up your own facility, because you can gain up to 70% of the total CapEx requirement in this market. I will refer to the rest of the study where you can read all the details. But on plant-based specifically, we've also looked together with GFI into this market, and we see great potential mostly for using extrusion facilities from, let's say, pet food and cereals to use that as retrofitting opportunities, as well as post-processing from animal-based meat facilities that can be retrofitted into plant-based meat post-processing facilities. And that is especially required if we look at the outlook for 2030, where capacity will need to be increased heavily. And we believe that this could be a great opportunity for the industry to, especially right now with less funding available, still get that capacity out there to be able to bring products to market to consumers. And then the last one on cultivated meat is specifically that there are so many challenges for the industry still to overcome. You saw that it's up to pilot scale, but most of them are still roughly in lab, upper end lab stage. That companies are currently having the full value chain in-house and need to overcome all the challenges that you see on the left, and they are even non-exhaustive by themselves, which makes that a CMO, CDMO could really play a big role there to help them out. But currently there are only 3 out there in the world, and the capacity is still relatively low because it goes up to 50,000 liters. So we highly encourage people to look more into a CMO business model, but also companies to actively have for example, with corporates that are experienced in other types of businesses, such as biotech, pharma, to get into this market and help each other with the scale-up challenge. Then lastly, we want to give an example on Gelter and Exada, where actually this did work pretty well. This is not something that we particularly worked on, but we just want to give this as a best practice to the industry. So specifically, Gelter is an animal-free collagen company, a startup established 8 years ago. Exada is a large biotech manufacturer, and they partnered up to run a commercial scale facility, which helped Gelter to prove basically its concept in a commercial stage, and helped also because they didn't need the investment for a full CapEx investment of a commercial scale facility, but did help with bringing a novel ingredient faster to market and get therefore also the proof of concept to attract investors to hopefully later on get the full commercial scale facility up and running. So I hope this is a nice guideline for everyone that these partnerships can work. And with that, I would like to close my presentation. But I do want to mention one thing still, and that is that BGP indeed has a expert network that we've only used over the past for our own use, which we found that it's pretty sad that the rest of the industry cannot tap into more than 2,000 people globally. So as of today, you can go to our website, and if you need industry experts for your business, quick validation, someone who can build a techno-economic model, for example, then feel free to connect with us, and we're happy to get the right expert for your project in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Floor. So next, we'll introduce our next speaker, Jolene Nam. Jolene Nam is currently the head of business development at Narasa, a wholly owned company of Temasek, focusing on accelerating the commercialization and scale-up of sustainable foods in the Asia Pacific. Before joining Narasa, Jolene was founder and CEO of Urban Tiller and was involved in the founding operations of 2 other ventures in mycelium ingredients, microvation, and alternative animal feed from insects, Feedworks. Welcome, and thank you, Jolene, for making the long trip. And we look forward to hearing about the joint ventures.
You're very tall.
So thank you very much for being here, and I'm very glad to be here as well, with many thanks to GFI. Thanks for the introduction as well, Lucas. So I'm Jolene, I'm from Narasa. We're a 2-year-old company spun out by Temasek Holdings. You might be familiar with Temasek as the investment holdings company. So we manage a total portfolio of around $400 billion, with over $8 billion invested over the last 10 years across the agri-food supply chain. So when Narasa was an idea that was incubated within the enterprise development group, it really was thinking about how do we allow disruption to happen in all these new innovations that were happening in the food chain. So Narasa was incorporated back in 2021, towards the end of the year. We're just a little bit shy of 2 years old. The mandate is to accelerate the commercialization and scale up adoption of different sustainable foods across Asia Pacific. And Asia Pacific has not been mentioned as much in this conference from yesterday and this morning. But Asia Pacific, as many of you may know as well, is severely underserved. In terms of all the innovation that's been happening in the US and across Europe, Asia still receives only a fraction of the investments required. And I'd like to share some numbers with you from a recent, not really recent, but a favorite report of mine. It's called the Asian Food Challenge that looks towards 2030. It's a joint report by Temasek, Rabobank, and PwC. It talks a lot about the new Asian consumer and the challenges that will happen over the next 10 years. Some numbers here. So we know that there's going to be a huge challenge by 2030, but I think Asia also presents a really interesting setup. So we're looking at about $800 billion worth of investments to increase food sustainably, increase more of it, and creating better food for consumers as well. The market in Asia is big, but as many of you know, Asia is also an extremely fragmented market. Unlike the US, you don't have access to the same number of consumers who have homogeneous choices. We also have to take note of various dietary preferences, needs, and also market dynamics. So a little bit more presence with Asia. Our focus on Asia is very much on how do we help companies tech transfer from Europe and the US to Singapore and to the rest of Asia. How do we continue to be that gateway to Asia? Many of you know that Singapore is the first country to approve the sale of cultivated meat. That's always been the case. And the truth is very few people have actually tasted cultivated meat in Singapore. That supply is still very limited. A fun anecdote I like to share is that you get to taste cultivated meat in Singapore once a week, 4 servings of it every week on a Thursday morning if you order quickly enough. And I think there's still a gap that needs to be addressed in scale up and adoption. So a little bit more about Narasa. We generally describe ourselves as enablers, operators, and investors. On the enabler scale, Thor has given a very good introduction of the gaps. We provide for lab scale to pilot scale, scale up, predominantly focus on alternative protein for now, mainly plant-based and precision fermentation. So on the enabler scale, we help companies transfer over to Asia. We also help Singaporean-based companies scale up to pilot scale, very intentionally hoping to also get them to operator scale, where we have our joint ventures for contract manufacturing, as well as building a muscle for helping people go to market in Asia. As an investor, we do not recreate an analogous investment portfolio as Temathic, but all of them are strategic investments that can hopefully assist these companies in scaling up and commercializing in Asia as well. There are 2 companies in the portfolio, which I'll tell you more about later as well. So a little bit about this project that's gone on in the enabler pillar. It's called the Food Tech Innovation Center. It's a completely greenfield project that we've built up in Biopolis, if you're familiar with Singapore. So very closely in partnership with A*STAR, where we have 2 pilot scale contract manufacturing labs for precision fermentation and high moisture extrusion respectively. So when I joined the founding management team of Nerasa, this place was completely empty. And what I had to do was to also go in and count pillars and decide how the labs were going to be cut out. As a greenfield project, we now have about 4,000 square meters of a food grade facility, which really is what I call a playground for food tech startups. It is food grade because you can actually sell products out of this facility once it's being manufactured. We think that's really important for commercialization, for consumers to be able to taste, give you feedback, and get market traction. So for the 2 joint labs, we operate as fee-for-service CDMOs. This really comes from the idea where when Nerasa was set up, we wanted to decouple fundraising that startups were doing from the capex required to buy equipment and invest in basically building facilities greenfield, and for them to come to us instead and use these services fee-for-service. For high moisture extrusion, we basically have A*STAR operating also a high pressure processing unit. So it is a 2-train service for a lot of plant-based products as well. And for precision fermentation, this is a joint lab between Scale Up Bio and A*STAR. And Scale Up Bio is our joint venture, which I'll draw out the relationship for you later. And the capacities are, as listed, up to 100 liters of fermentation, up to 80 kilograms per hour for extrusion. It's a little bit like a WeWork. We've also set up private labs that companies can come in and set up their own pilot scale facilities. We have shared labs, we have food grade kitchens, and kitchens where you can host events, launch tastings. We've hosted several novel food tastings. So on top of novel food approval in Singapore for commercial sale, there's a small part of the room that I know about this. You can actually apply for an administrative exemption for novel foods that have not yet been approved, for a tasting to a limited group in Singapore of 30 people at a time. And you can actually do that at our facility because our team has been trained to host these events, and we're very happy to talk to anyone who would like to do something like that. We also have a few tenants who've moved in already, including Givaudan. So Givaudan, I think, is not here today, but Givaudan's, of course, the Taste and Fragrance House, and they've set up a taste and color lab to actually provide some application development know-how, personnel, and resources inside the Food Tech Innovation Center. So the 2 joint ventures, while we have the technologies at pilot scale, we've also scaled it up in Singapore in a separate facility. So our joint venture partner in extrusion is Kremer. They're a Hamburg-based company that is mostly in commodity trading, but also operates several facilities around the world. With high moisture extrusion there, we have an annual capacity of 2,000 tons. And with ADM, we have a joint venture called Scale Up Bio, where we're also launching and currently commissioning the larger facility that has fermentation tanks up to 10,000 liters with downstream processing. What we think is also really important is we don't just provide you with the equipment, we also provide you with the software needed to run it. So at Kremer, as well as Scale Up Bio, you have a full team who can actually help you operate the equipment. You can negotiate quantities, and also for us, it's very important that the startups get to keep their IP. It's a completely professional CDMO relationship, and I'm happy to take any questions about challenges we face there as well. So these 2 facilities are out in Tuas in the west of Singapore. They were also greenfield projects. So we've taken on the headache to clear all your regulatory submissions, regulatory approvals to actually operate these labs as well. So a little bit about what we've been doing in the last year and a half. As part of just welcoming new startups into our ecosystem, we ran a startup challenge with A-Star, with Trendlines, which is a VC fund headquartered in Singapore and Israel, as well as Enterprise Singapore. And we made a global call for applications for people to come and try using these facilities. We had about 40 companies apply, and the 9 finalists who finally went through the program are listed there. Some of them are in the room, and we were able to actually get feedback and also make sure that some of them continued using the facility for future development. And for those of you familiar, we've also been appointed the Food Hack Ambassador of Singapore, and we host most of our food hack meetups in the facility as well, the Innovation Center. That's a little bit about ecosystem. 2 portfolio companies, Next Gen Foods, the makers of Tyndall, as well as Growthwell, a Singapore plant-based company. Very excited to be looking ahead to the next year where we should be shaping up a new investment strategy and looking always for partners that can take us to new heights. And we are for now based in Singapore only, but very excited to also expand to the rest of Asia. So if there are any questions, opportunities, curiosities, feel free to reach out to me after this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolene. The innovation centers and the ecosystem building is very much needed, so we very much appreciate that. Our next speaker here today is Hendrik. Hendrik Wageman is the head of business operations at the Biobase Europe plant in Ghent, Belgium. He is one of the largest pilot and demonstration facilities in industrial biotechnology. Hendrik has a PhD in fermentation technology and in metabolic engineering, and is also co-founder of the precision fermentation company InBios. He is also a board member of the Biobase Industries Consortium, BIC, which is the European equivalent to Biomade. Welcome, Hendrik. He is definitely an exemplar of a demonstration facility, so we look forward to hearing more about it.
Okay, thank you, Lucas. Happy to be here in San Francisco and to meet so many new and interesting people. My talk today will mainly focus on the challenges in scale-up of fermentation-derived proteins, and then later in the talk, first in the talk from a BVP point of view, and later in the presentation by showing the collaboration we've done with the company Eastham. So who are we? Biobase Europe Pilot Plant. We're a multi-purpose pilot and demonstration facility, or CDMO. We were founded in 2008 as a non-profit organization, which does not mean that we don't want to make profit. We sure do, but all the profit we make is reinvested into growth. We were operational since 2010, and then we have gradually increased the capacity of the plant step by step. And currently, we're with more than 179 people, and made a turnover in 2022 of more than 25 million. This is an overview of the facility, especially for today with American flag and blue. If you have good eyes, you can recognize it. Post-COVID, we have invested 32 million euro in the expansion of the facility with support from Europe, the region of Flanders, and also the city of Ghent. And basically that money has been used to triple the fermentation capacity. And basically also reducing the lead times. Currently, lead times are realistically between 3 and 4 months, and that's also what you need to prepare for a run properly, to do risk assessments, to order all the necessary raw materials, etc. So here's an overview of the facility. We have laboratories for fermentation development, for downstream development. We have a fermentation hall with fermenters from 150 liter to 15,000 liter. We're expanding with the 75,000 liter fermenter. And then we have several downstream halls, one dedicated to aqueous-based downstream processing, one dedicated to solvent-based downstream processing, and one multi-purpose for smaller scale downstream processing, biocatalysis, and pretreatment of biomass. And we also have customer hubs, so basically we have offices available for our customers to follow up on the trials and be present during the trials. Here's an overview of the capacity. I'm not going to go in details. What's the new stuff is basically the 30 liter fermenters, 8 30 liter fermenters, a third 15,000 liter, 3 additional 1,500 liters, and then of course the 75,000 liter with 7,500 liter seed fermenter. It has already been addressed in the previous talks to some extent, but the value of that is probably the biggest hurdle in biomanufacturing, and shared pilot facilities or CDMOs play an essential role in bridging that gap. And what I would like to emphasize on is that it's especially at that intermediate scale, the technological risk is very high and a lot of capital, and that's where the investors run out of the room. Basically, leaving your innovation dying quietly in the valley of death, where it will sure find many corpses of other once high potential innovations. What's specific for fermentation-derived proteins is that it's even more challenging. Generally speaking, we're talking about food or feed ingredients, so the facility needs to be food grade, which leads to higher capex and opex. Also, you have to go through regulatory filings, which leads to longer lead times. And specifically for biomass proteins, what we've seen through the collaborations we've done is that, you're hitting the price range. So there's a tendency also to go to continuous processes, which have extra challenges with respect to contamination. I'll come back to that. And for precision proteins, where you have a little bit more, let's say, in the price range, you have to find a balance between basically a cheap DSP, a cheap downstream process, and still having product within the specification. To make the comparison with by doing it yourself or collaborating with a CDMO shared pilot facility, I made this a very tangible example. So imagine a new company, fictive company NP+, that has developed a fermentation-derived protein for food applications. They want to scale up the process from lab to 15,000 liter scale because they want to convince investors. They want to have material to do toxicity testing, application testing, regulatory filings. And they, of course, also want to have the data to do some modeling. So what's needed for that, very arbitrarily chosen, this could be a program to get to that scale. So you're going to run it at 150 liter scale, 10 fermentations to validate the fermentation process, to basically do feasibility testing on the DSP, then take it to 1500 liter scale to optimize the DSP, then do regulatory runs, typically 5 runs at 1500 liter scale is what we commonly do, and then we take it to 15 cube to make product. Now, basically, if you would do that yourself, of course, you have to design the plant, which will take you 6 to 12 months. You have to construct the plant, typically between 12 and 24. To be able to do what I just explained, you probably need 20 to 30 million euro, and large OPEX, often underestimated, but microorganisms tend to grow overnight and during weekends, so you'll probably need to have staff for that. And in the worst case possible, you might have a redundant facility after it has been used. So we think it's better to work with an open access pilot facility because you don't have to design anything and everything is there. You don't have to construct. CapEx is in most cases zero. It can only be maybe some small equipment that is missing. You pay the service fee, which is estimated to be like 1.5 million for what I have just shown. And it's a multi-purpose facility. So of course the equipment can be used later on. So we believe it's much faster, but also cheaper. And also had a bit addressed. We think it's better because you have all the experts under one roof. We're not the only ones in Europe. There are more open access pilot facilities. Some of them have unfortunately already gone bankrupt. Last year, the bioprocess pilot facility in Delft, who we are often confused with. I don't know why. They have gone bankrupt for sure. We have not. Otherwise, I would be here. But it also shows how difficult it is to run such a facility. All these facilities are also nicely shown in a database that we've helped with. It's pilots for you. It's a bit similar to Capacitor that you have here in the States. Let's move on now and dive a little bit deeper into the collaboration we had with Enough. So for those who don't know Enough, Enough is a mycoprotein producing company, and as a meat alternative, their product is called Abunda. The concept of the company is that they integrate with the bioethanol facility, leading to zero waste. We have scaled up the process from lab 7 liter scale batch-wise to 15,000 liter continuous, and based on the results they have achieved at the bio-based sugar power plant, together with their own small pilot. It's important to mention that they also have a 200 liter unit themselves where they can mimic the process, but taking those results together, they were able to build a first facility in Sas van Gent. Sas van Gent, or Lok of Ghent, is basically only 20 kilometers from the biobased pilot plant. The journey with the scale-up journey with Enough was really a fast track from lab to a demonstration scale. We started working with them mid-2018 on 7-liter scale. And then in 2021, they already laid the first stone of their facility. And in 2023, they are operational. It can serve as an example, but it's important to mention that Enough has also been able to tap into the legacy work of Quorn, which made it a little bit easier to do a fast scale-up because this is really extremely fast. So let's take you through it. So we started to run the fermentation at 7-liter scale and tech transfer. You can already see the high viscosity here also in the broth, meaning very low oxygen transfer, which will, of course, have an important effect also in the later runs at larger scale. Then we took it to 1500-liter scale, basically first to optimize the downstream, later to produce food-grade material. And then finally, we took it to 15,000-liter scale and made it continuous and produced, of course, also food-grade, because it would be a waste of time to produce at that scale and not having product that can be used for market application. To give you a bit of an idea of what type of challenges you observe in such a collaboration, I've summarized that for all the different steps we've gone through. First of all, at 7-liter scale, you could already see the video. The oxygen transfer is really poor in the glass fermenter. It's a high viscosity of this type of fermentation. So we've learned that for these type of processes, it's better to do tech transfer immediately at 150-liter scale, where we can use a stainless steel fermenter. The first runs we've done on 1500-liter scale mainly focused on optimizing the downstream, which you cannot do at smaller scale, basically. It's very difficult to mimic. So it was the first scale where it was possible. We optimized the heat treatment for reducing the RNA content. We optimized the dewatering step by decanter centrifuge. When we produced our first food grade samples at 1500-liter scale, it was very, very crucial to control the production of mycoproteins, basically by having good strategies in place to avoid oxygen limitation. And as we moved forward further to the 15,000-liter scale, we had to focus again on the downstream. So going from downstream to upstream to downstream again. And basically what we observed is that to have product in spec, it's important also to don't have post-contamination in the downstream. So to do the DSP, for example, at elevated temperatures, but also to implement additional cleaning procedures we have done. That means before the run and also during the run. But then the most challenging part still had to come, because we ran this process also continuously at 15,000-liter scale, which was essential also for Enough to have that data to provide for the commercial plant that they were building in Saas-van-Gent. The challenges we observed there is that, of course, running continuous at such a scale, you really have to fine-tune the dilution rate in the upstream part very carefully, because otherwise you get washout of the biomass. Also, the downstream, we performed the downstream quasi in line with the fermentation, which means that, of course, if it's not matching properly, probably you'll have everything is basically going to waste. So that really requires some additional engineering to make that possible, and to have the heat treatment and the dewatering step fitting very nicely on the fermentation. And we also had to design strategies again to perform the intermittent cleaning, to have product in spec, and to keep the microbial contamination load to an acceptable level. But all the hard work has paid off, and this is how the facility looks like. On the website of Enough, you also have a very nice drone flight that you can see. So I would definitely invite you to do that. If you would like to learn more about Enough, their CEO, Jim Lurt, is also here on the conference, and he will be happy to take also more questions from you. If you like this testimonial, actually, we have more on our website. There are a couple of collaborations with large corporates, also with startups. So every story is a bit different. We're currently doing, as you can imagine, quite some scale-up work also on precision protein production. And I would say if the organizers are happy with my performance, I would be happy also to show that next year. We're working on some testimonials. I think I will be able to talk about that. And end to end, I would like to show a short drone flight that was actually captured only last week. So I had to really hurry to get everything ready for this event. But it's a shortened drone flight that shows a bit the fermentation capacity that we have. So please enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you, Hendrik. I don't know about you all, but I have facility envy looking at that. Quite impressive. And to create the ecosystem for demonstration plans for people to come and use instead of everyone doing it themselves. But to have the counterfactual argument, we would have microtechnology here, our next speaker, Alan here. Mr. Alan is the CEO of microtechnology. Since its founding in 2013, Alan has guided microtechnology, leading successful rounds of funding totaling over $200 million. Alan is a true motivator with a knack for overcoming objections, streamlining processes, and finding creative ways to grow the company. His passion for health and wellness falls in line with microtechnology's goals for increasing the availability of healthy and sustainable food options. Thank you for being here today, Alan, and we look forward to hear about microtechnology's scaling story and your impressive facility as well.
Thank you, Lucas. All right, good afternoon. So hopefully everybody had enough caffeine, and I'm losing everybody already. So let me see about this clicker, which way it clicks. See if I can get to the next slide or not. How about the green one? No. Here we go. Got something. Great. So again, my name's Alan Hahn. I'm CEO, co-founder of Microtechnology. Started this journey about 10 years ago. I really want to get with you guys today that this is, really going to let you know what we experience going through the valley of death, or I call it crossing the chasm without falling to the bottom of the chasm. So it is a tough journey. And to get to commercialization is pretty an amazing goal. When you get that product out there, you get some revenue, and now you got to meet some numbers. By the way, it's much easier before you hit revenue. Let me tell you, you have different situation there. So, how many people in this room are dealing with the challenge of scaling up fermentation and know somebody who's trying to deal with how do I scale this up? Anybody in the room? Yeah, quite a few. And, it's a tough challenge. How do you do this? We had to figure it out, and we had to go find, I wish I'd known about your facility long ago. That would have been very lovely, because that would have worked. But when you start looking around, what's available out there, there's not a lot, particularly in the US, to find a food grade facility that can do it at scale, and something you can actually taste and sell and get something called, product market fit, which every investor is going to ask you about 10 times a day. So, when you look at this, it's like, well, how do I go get this done? Do I go over to Europe? Do I go over to China? How do I go figure this out? So the VCs out there, they all have the answer. They say, come close, Alan. Let me tell you the secret is go find someone else to do the fermentation for you. So we did that. So we went out and we searched the world, and we found some solutions out there, and I'll get into that in a minute. But just to give you an overall feel for it, so I've raised $220 million over 5 rounds of funding. We built an 86,000 square foot facility in Denver, Colorado, in the city of Aurora, so not too far away. We have about 500,000 liters of capacity at our facility, and we have about 100 people in the organization. So it's a really beautiful facility. It's very nice, shiny stainless steel. It's 4 years old. It looks amazing. And under the same roof, you can go from, a 1 liter flask up to 90,000 liter tanks. So it's pretty interesting. So these are the key things that typical investors want to get the checkbox for if they're going to give you that next round of funding. Can you prove scaling? Do you have a platform, or do you have a product? And do you have product market fit? And so this is what I'm going to take you through, see if you are in this situation, or see where we can help. So proving scaling. So finding that company that could help us scale our product. So we searched the world. We found a company in France, and we worked with them, and it was painful. Why? Because what we heard earlier, the tanks aren't necessarily designed for our organism. So we had different requirements. The downstream processing is unique. And we had just amazing headaches to get through, but it was good because when we got through that, we had some material that we could show and evaluate. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have the right color that we wanted, but it functioned. We did have a really interesting time getting tankers full of liquid from one location, drive it across France to another location for spray drying, not to mention the contamination that could possibly and did happen from that experience. So it was, I don't know that I slept much during that time. It really wasn't, but we got our first metric ton of material, and it proved a lot, and we were able to get to the milestones. And it's an interesting process to go through. You learn a lot, you spend a lot of money, you lose a lot of sleep, but at the end, if you found the right partner, it works. Then we ran into an interesting decision we had to make. Are we a product company? Are we going to make a single product, or are we a platform company? And you have to make that decision for yourself. And we determined we're a platform company, which, let me tell you, that's a painful decision. Why? Because now you got to build something. And, going from doing something in a lab, and getting it to produce something to actually putting steel in the ground and then getting the expertise to do something with that steel and produce it is incredible. Always towards this goal of product market fit. Does my product taste right? Does it have the right aroma? Does it have the right functionality? All of these things fit in there. And can I sell it at the right price? And by the way, any Excel spreadsheet can point you in the direction going, yes, I'm going to have, this point in time where I produce a certain amount of material. It's going to be at a certain price. And then, we're going to beat the cost of animal-based products, and we're going to win the day. That rarely happens. It's a tough road you have to go down. So, but we were able to get the check marks as we went through it. So we proved scaling. So we went from, 7 liter tanks that we were able to do, or fermenters. And then, we did 180,000 liter run, and it worked. And so we got the check box for that. Platform, we proved to our investors. We had several other ideas in the pipeline that, hey, it follows the same approach that we took on the first one. So we have a platform. Check. Product market fit. This is a tricky one because it's dynamic. Just because you have product market fit today doesn't mean next month you have product market fit. This is a nightmare that should keep you up every night and really think about how you fit into the marketplace. Is my product really the right fit? What can I do? How do I make it better, cheaper, whatever it takes in order to have that fit? So as you're talking to different investors out there, you really have to identify what your risks are. What have you solved for and what have you not solved for? Because that'll tell you who the right investors are for you. So technology risks, legal risks, regulatory, all of these, you have to think about, yep, I got that one done. I got this one done. No, I don't have this one done. Okay. So then as you talk to investors, particularly on that first call, where it's usually a very make nice call, everybody's really happy when they meet you and they're happy when they hang up and they take no action after that. You got a problem, but it felt nice, felt really nice. But, what it means was what you communicated to them, they didn't understand your risk profile, or the risk profile that you explained to them wasn't one they invested. So I'm pretty brutal with this when I get on that first call. I'm qualifying them harder than they're qualifying me, because I'd like to get off that call and say, thank you very much, and I'll never talk to you again. Have a great life. That's great, because I really want to find the ones that want to commit to doing due diligence on our company so we can get the funding we need to get to the next milestone and get the next funding and get to where we've commercialized the product. So you really have to think about this hard. And the goal is you're not trying to de-risk your company so it's a guaranteed return for the investor. What you're really trying to communicate is what is the risk profile for your company. Communicate that clearly. You'll have a much better relationship. You won't have these ugly board meetings. And let me tell you, you don't want to have ugly board meetings. You really want to have partners. And I refer to all my investors as investor partners. So it's not where they're coming at me, I'm coming at them, and we're duking it out. It is a partnership. And if you think about it that way, you'll have a much better business life, because it's like getting married. When you have these investors come in, they're on your board, you're dealing with on a regular basis, you need them to make the right decisions in a timely manner. Believe me, you want to have partners and not just investors. So what we're offering today, this is the first time publicly that we've offered this, is we're creating a new service. We call it FermentX. So it's fermentation as a service. And we're opening up our facility in Aurora that will be able to do this kind of work for our partners out there. And we're really excited about it to help companies get through this valley of death or this chasm without careening to the bottom. Okay. I won't take you through all of this, but we have tremendous amount of capacity. We've been able to greatly improve our process. So what used to take us a year to produce, we can do in a week. So it's a tremendous opportunity to help others. And so if you're interested in it, just let us know. We have a new page on our website. We've got Bruno Dubois over here that you can talk to, who heads up our FermentX efforts. But we've got 90,000 liter tanks, 3,000 liter tanks, 250 liter tanks. So we have 6 of each of those, plus smaller ones. So spray drying, it is which I think is on here. So we have all the certifications you could possibly want, and all here in the US. So much easier to get to and to get access to the kind of fermentation services you need to see if you do have product market fit. So thank you very much. And I think I did that in my 12 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, very impressive facility. And to kind of give the engineering perspective of what needs to happen in order to get to that commercial scale is our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce David Ziskin. David is an industry leader in the food innovation capital projects with clients ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies. He serves as the market lead for food and beverage at Stantec. Through innovation solutions, he helps companies sustainably solve their manufacturing infrastructure challenge. A registered professional engineer from Georgia and Kentucky, and a project management professional. David resides in Atlanta, Georgia with his wife and 3 boys and enjoys the outdoors and traveling. Thank you for being here today, David. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing more.
Thank you, Lucas, Amanda, and the Good Food Institute for inviting me today. I'm excited to talk a little bit about engineering on your facility. So I recently had a client tell me on a recent project, as a result of early engagement, early engineering, they were able to save 10 times that engineering cost on their future construction costs. Then I started digging into that number a little bit and found another quote. Industry benchmarks show benefits of up to 30% reduced cost and shorter project execution times when front-end engineering design is performed. Now, consider that front-end engineering design might only cost 2 to 3% of your total project with a potential savings of 30%. That's huge. So what I want to go through today, really 3 things I want you to take away, and I'll tell you how we're going to get there. So the first thing on your project, make sure you're establishing a well-defined scope, cost, and schedule. Identify and analyze that risk. The second thing that I just mentioned, early engineering, that's going to be your greatest influence on your project outcome, including the cost, that early engagement, that early engineering. Third thing, there is no one best way to do it. There's no one size fits all. Everything doesn't work the same for everyone. So whether that's going contract manufacturing versus building your own facility, whether that's what contract structure you're using or project delivery methodology, there's no one correct way. So we're going to talk through a little bit what it takes to build a food plant, working with an engineering team, what that engineering design process looks like, and then go over some lessons learned. So what does it really take to build a food plant? So these are a few of the different things to consider. Certainly there's technology, the location. Is it going to be a rural, suburban, urban area? What does your labor look like? Not only labor cost, labor availability, and not just operating labor. What about actually building this thing? Transportation for your feedstocks, for your raw materials, for your finished goods, the capital expense, the operating expense, utilities, so the external infrastructure, water, wastewater, power, things like that. Some of the internal infrastructure items like processed water, clean steam, chiller, making sure you have a food defensible facility. And then really, we got to look at this idea of TIC, total installed cost, which is what we're going to be looking at, which is ultimately what you've got to come up with in order to successfully build this facility. So engineering design process, everyone defines this a little bit differently, has different deliverables. One of the things I'd really encourage you as you're working with someone is to consider what deliverables are important for you and your investors. So you may need to pull some deliverables earlier, you may need to move some deliverables later. So generally, I look at this process, sometimes you hear it called FEL, front-end loading, FEP, front-end planning. So starting with this stage 1, this FEL1, I also call it feasibility. Initially, you're coming up with your project charter, your block flow diagram, your basics of the project. What does this look like? As you imagine, the level of definition is quite low, right? You've got a wide range here. The cost that you come out of that number might be a plus or minus 50% cost estimate. Probably not enough that it's not bankable. You can't go to an investor with it, but you can decide, are you going to engage on the next stage of engineering? Are you going to consider spending this money, going down this path? Are you headed in the right direction? So order of magnitude here, that's typically, call it in the 8 to 16 week range, usually about 0.5% of your total installed cost. So relatively low investment to figure out, what does this look like? What does this cost? Should we go into the next stage? Then FEL2, also called pre-feed, sometimes conceptual. This is where a lot of things start coming together. Process flow diagrams, heat and material balance, plot plan, better capital cost estimate. So hopefully get within, call it that plus or minus 30% cost range. I usually like to see a sustainability assessment here. So if you're looking at sustainability aspects, what's being integrated, what does that look like? Start talking about a risk register. So what's your risk mitigation plan? What can be out there? And what does your overall project schedule look like? That FEL2, that pre-feed stage, 3 to 6 month range, I'd say probably on average, and cost maybe 1 to 2% of that total installed cost. So a little bit more, but again, it's giving you more confidence and more certainty to move to that next stage before you get to more detailed design and before you actually start building this facility. So next is what you might sometimes hear called the feed or front-end engineering design. Also basic engineering, FEL3, sort of same general area. We're really advancing a lot of the deliverables from that previous stage, from that FEL2. We're getting our technical requirements established, cost, schedule, might produce a model, really have an idea of what the engineering costs are gonna look like, what your strategy is, how are you gonna procure stuff, what's your execution strategy, look at constructability, things like that. So once we get all that put together, then we can go into that detailed design. That front-end engineering design, as I mentioned earlier, in the 2 to 3% of your total installed cost range. So engineering, it's not a huge number, right? But it's driving a lot of this cost certainty and helping ensure that your project is successful. So wanted to hit a little bit on project delivery methods. So a few terms you may hear out there, but really I want to emphasize, as I said earlier, there's no one best way. There's no one size fits all. These are just things to think about and things to consider as you're trying to decide what's the best methodology. So 3 of the common ones that are out there, and there are some that sort of fall between this continuum, but you might hear design build. So common terminology there, you'll hear turnkey. People like to say one throat to choke, right? One person to go after for any issues. You got that single source responsibility. You could have potentially faster delivery time, but generally in that stage, since you're giving all that responsibility to one power, you're also ceding a little bit of control. There's also this idea of design bid build. So you're not coming up with that initial number up front. You're going through, you design it, then you bid things out, and then you go to a general contractor and bid that out. You have a little bit more control. Of course, going through that bid process is going to increase the time a little bit. Some other terms you might hear is CMAR, construction manager at risk, or multi-prime, same general idea. So then there's this other essentially services-based model. So we've got this construction manager not at risk. So you've got essentially 3 parties here. You've got an engineer or designer, you've got your general contractor, and then construction manager that pulls all this together. Again, so you've got greater owner control. With more control comes more responsibility, right? You have to decide what makes sense, what you're doing, what are you producing, how much certainty is there to decide what fits best for you. And again, just want to emphasize there is no, it worked for this person, I should do it this way. It worked this way, I should do it that way. There are pros and cons to every approach. So contract structures are along the same lines, and it ties into those delivery methodologies. And again, I'll go back to the point is, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? There is no one best way, one right way. So terms you'll hear and see, sometimes you have a cost plus contract structure where you're paying a percentage of construction costs. Sometimes you'll have a guaranteed maximum price where you want someone to cap that price. You can go in with a lump sum or fixed cost. So you know, this is what it is. This is what I'm getting delivered. And then you have this blended idea of maybe a target price and maybe some shared savings, but also flexibility also on those overruns. I really look at it, I like to put it on this graph of risk cost versus risk transfer. for any of these, you're exchanging cost and you're exchanging risk. So the more risk you take on, the more cost that changes. Same thing. So think about it. If you're pushing more risk on another party, your cost is probably going to go up, right? You could take on more risk, your cost is going to be lower, but you're taking on more risk yourself. Oops. So I did just a few words on risk. So, I think I mentioned the risk register earlier. Very important, no matter what stage of engineering you're doing, is to go through that risk register, come up with all those possible risks that are out there, and figure out your trade-off, what that looks like, what can happen. There are things that we call positive risks or opportunities. So if there is that positive risk or opportunity, figure out a way to enhance that or exploit it, make sure that it really happens, right? If it's a negative risk or something you don't want to have happen, what can you do with it? Can you share it with someone? Can you transfer it to someone? Can you mitigate it? Can you avoid it? So look at those two different types of risks. Now, next thing I want to hit on, so I have this idea, right, of early engineering and early engagement, and you probably saw a very similar diagram from Hendrik, who very nicely established that as the Valley of Death, right? So this is a little bit of a different idea, but I think same concept here. It's a cost influence curve we use in construction. So this is from the Construction Industry Institute. So this idea of influence with expenditures. So early in your project, you can go through multiple iterations of your project on paper, right? Relatively cheap, relatively inexpensive to do this engineering. As you go through, though, and your influence starts going down, your costs start going up. When your costs get really high, it's expensive to change things. So I wanted to hit on a few key lessons learned as I wrap up. So one idea I talked about, again, these deliverables. Consider what deliverables you need. Just because an engineering firm says this is what I'm going to produce for you for FEL 1, 2, or 3, is that what you need? What do you need? Some of these deliverables might be needed from a cost standpoint, but others you might need, you might not need. So figure out what really makes sense. When it comes to contingency, you could plan contingency by a percentage of your project cost, or you could go on a line item basis. One's going to give you a little more certainty as opposed to just applying a blank number across the page. When you're talking about a cost estimate, always make sure you have a level of accuracy, a level of definition on that cost estimate. What is that plus or minus? What does that really look like? And how is someone coming up with that number? That's going to give you more certainty. What assumptions are included in there? Very important to know, so you make sure everyone's on the same page. What are you assuming in this number, in this schedule? There's this idea of constructability as you're going through design. What is it going to take to actually create this thing? What does it really take to build it? And is it going to cost more to construct it a certain way versus another way? That can ultimately save you costs down the road. Again, as we talked about those early stages in that life cycle, project life cycle, just from that curve, the more you have to influence the outcome of the project and the less it costs to also influence that outcome. So a few wrap-up final thoughts. I mentioned before, well-planned and well-executed front-end engineering design, seeing the numbers say can reduce that overall project cost by 30% and potentially shorter execution times. Again, think of that trade-off. That engineering cost is, call it 2 to 3% of that total installed cost, with a potential of saving 30%. Again, project success, you must have established a well-defined scope, cost, and schedule. Make sure you're going through risks. Going through this project definition cycle, this more detailed engineering and phased approach gives you better cost certainty, refined schedule, and can help reduce risk. The other thought, what is best? What is the best delivery methodology, the contract structure, whatever it is for your project? That's going to depend. So it really depends on what your goal is, what you're trying to accomplish. And then just want to close it with, again, because I'm big on planning, big on engineering, the success is going to be dependent on that proper planning, on going through that process in order to make sure your project is successful. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I want to thank all our speakers for not only great presentations, but staying within time that we can open it up for some questions possibly. And I know we're a little bit light on questions in the swap card app, but I can maybe lead us off here for maybe David, since it's top of mind. Perhaps how early should someone, would you all like to come on up? How early is too early, and what should companies come to you to begin the engineering planning process? And let's see, can we get got it.
So I don't think there's such a thing as too early. I think, again, establishing this up front, maybe you're not ready to go through detailed design, right? Maybe you're not ready to spend a bunch on the detailed design and engineering, but engage early, figure out what it is. How much money do you need to raise? What is this going to cost? Get an idea of how much this is really going to cost. And you can't do that just by costing out some equipment or even benchmarking, what someone else's facility cost. So I would say there's no such thing as too early. I don't know if Alan, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, don't do what I did. So we kicked it off and it went much higher than we had anticipated. So I had to do a new round of funding in the middle of construction. Talk about having a gun to your head. I don't recommend it. It's not a lot of fun. So whatever it is, try to get like 50% more than you think it is, and you'll be fine.
Or just go through that engineering process, right? So you know how much it's likely to cost.
Yeah. I guess to follow up on that along those lines, this is a question for you, Hendrik. How important would you say is early stage, and for you as well, Julian, is funding from both early stage finance as well as from government grants and government in general?
Well, I think we have similar curves. Apparently in our presentation, we also have similar experiences, because I think also in engineering, and I must say also in the collaborations we had with companies, to engage early on with an engineering firm really helps you also to understand what's really needed, because you question things, things you haven't thought about. So it helps you in the design. I think it's very similar to engage very early on in scale up, because it also helps you to think about things that you might have forgotten about, or it will basically give you direction. That's very important. To come back to your question, I think it's very important to have some governmental support for scale up, because a lot of startups don't really know what scale up really means, and it's important that they have a chance to basically try out, to make mistakes, and a government fund can help to basically take the first steps. At the Biobased Europe Power Plant, we've tried in many different systems to apply a voucher scheme, basically, where companies could, for 50,000 euro or 100,000 euro, get scale-up services. It was typically organized within European projects, so it's not money that came from ourselves. It's European money. But what I've seen is that the leverage effect on that was super. There are many companies who hadn't done any scale-up before. They did a very simple run with us, 50,000, 100,000 euro, but they're still existing customers. So it allows you to make that first amount of product, to go to potential parties, to convince them, and then the money comes from investors, from application partners. So I think it's essential. Yeah. Jolene, maybe you want to...
Yeah, no, I agree with what Hendrik has said. And I'm guilty of this as a founder myself, right? Like, you need to promise scale up in order for the investors to give you the next round of money. But increasingly in my current role, controversial opinion, I also feel as if a company needs to prove that they're actually ready to scale up. So putting in some of their own money, whether they're bootstrapping or it's grant money, or sort of taking a chunk of money that is dear to them for them to do other things, right? To actually prove that you're ready to scale up. That's also important to prove to your future investors that you're ready to run this trial and eager to actually scale up. I think sometimes it's easy for a company that's raised a certain amount of money to prioritize other activities than to actually rush through that process as well.
And I'll just add the importance of these early stage ecosystems where you're building that capacity and ability for folks to come to you and to de-risk on that side and not having to have that capital outlay on the early pilot to demonstration scale. And I think, having this expert panel here, and you can come to folks like David or Alan or even Flora and their 2,000 plus group of experts and find the expertise that you need to scale up. So I guess with that, I would like maybe just like 2 words from each of you of what you see as maybe the bottleneck to scale it for the industry.
Two words, huh? So I'm going to call it what I was on as engage early. So engage early, understand what that cost is, what the impact is to get to the next stage.
Ferment X.
Consumer demand.
Finance. It used to be not a problem, but nowadays we see lots of customers who want to do scale up with us and who struggle with basically financing their activities. So, but we have a session on that, I think, later on.
And I would say TRL, because we must also not forget that some of the technologies are not at a commercial stage yet. And we should all have expectations with that in mind, that some products are not on the market next year or the year after.